Today we'll be looking at the IAM use case, Identity and Access Management. IAM is a very critical piece of infrastructure for a lot of businesses because it typically sits in front of your applications and defines what users can do within your application. If you get IAM wrong, your applications don't work. There are a bunch of things we need to get right for this use case. One is multi-region. If you're running your IAM workloads across multiple regions, you want to make sure that you're domiciling data where it needs to live. You'll get better round trip times and also be able to satisfy regulatory compliance by not leaking data into places it shouldn't be. It also needs to be very consistent. If a user is asking for something they should no longer have permission to, and a database is eventually consistent, they might still be able to access that resource after it's become unavailable to them. The system also needs to scale horizontally. If on day one you have 100 users of your system, that's very different to 1 million users in a few months or a few years from then. You need to be able to scale with your user base. And there needs to be zero downtime between migrations or schema changes, etc. This isn't the kind of system that can go offline for maintenance and leave your users hanging. In today's demo, I've essentially recreated a very crude version of Google Docs to show you how their permissioning system works and how it might work in CockroachDB. We'll have users distributed across the world accessing a website via a load balancer. That will target a backend machine that lives in fly.io and talks via load balancer to a CockroachDB database. User data is pinned to locations, so they get quick, low latency access through the system to their local database and back again. The backend for the system is very simple. There are 5 endpoints exposed, one that allows a user to log in and returns a JWT, one that lists the top level files and folders that they have access to, one that allows them to view the folders that they have access to, so list files and folders within a given directory, and another allows them to view the contents of a file. I won't go into the implementation of the service because you'll get a feel for it as I show you the application itself. Let's start deploying things. I'll deploy my CockroachDB database. With that set up, I'll hop onto the CockroachDB terminal and I'll create our database. I'll call the database IAM. The regions will represent the regions that I've deployed the CockroachDB cluster to. I'll enable super regions to pin the data geographically. And finally, I'll use the database. Next, I'll create a table that represents both files and folders in the system. There's a flag that denotes whether it's a folder or a file, and then content, which will be null in the case of a directory and populated in the case of a file. The locality of the table is going to be global because it's not region sensitive, but the permissions and the users that access the data will be. I'll create a locality-aware users table containing an ID and a username. I'll create a type called access type, which is an enum containing the values edit, comment, or read. These define what a user can do to a file. If they don't have an access type, they don't have any permission. And then finally, a permissions table, which links together the users and the permission type they have against a given file or folder. This is also regional by row, so user permissions are stored alongside the user themselves. Next, I'll insert some data. This is the top level. There's a folder called A. It doesn't have any parents. It's a folder and it doesn't have any content. Underneath that, there's a file called B, which does have content. And next to that, there's a directory called C, which doesn't have any content because it's a directory and has 3 files underneath it. I'll create 3 users, one in Europe, one in the States, and one in Singapore. And I'll grant those users permissions to various things. So in the case of Alice, I'm granting her edit permissions to the top level directory, which contains a bunch of other folders, and then I'm granting just read permission on another. For the Bob user, I'm granting comment access on a directory and therefore everything underneath it. And finally, for the Carol user, I'm granting read access to a specific file. Let's now deploy the backend to fly.io. I'll create 2 secrets. One is the database URL to our Cockroach cloud instance, and another is the JWT secret, which is just a randomly generated string of bytes. I'll now build and scale the application. That's the Frankfurt instance deployed. So essentially what I'll be doing is making a short hop to Frankfurt from my London-based location, and then a tiny hop within Frankfurt to the database, and then back again. Now with that deployed, I'll scale it out to 3 regions. Before scaling, a user in the States and in Singapore would hit the Frankfurt application. But now that I've scaled it, they'll hit their local applications in the US and Singapore respectively, which will then make tiny local hops to their nearest CockroachDB region where their data is already pinned. With that all running, I'll start the front end and visit the website. And if I log in as the Alice user, we'll see that the top level permissions to the folder called A allow her to see this folder. And she can also view the additional file that was granted in addition to that folder. There's the I files content. And if we look into the folder, we'll see that there are a bunch of things. There's another subfolder with files in it, all of which can be viewed or edited. And another file that happens to be at the same level as that folder, which can also be viewed or edited. You may notice that as I navigate around here, there's low latency to all of these endpoints. And that's all because I've co-located the application and the database, and the application and the database are close to me with data domiciled close to me. Let's log out as the Alice user and log in as the Bob user. This user is based in the States, so I'd expect longer latencies, but you'll see how their permissions differ to the Alice user. They have commenter access to one directory, so within there, they can view and comment on the file. And finally, if I check the Carol user, whose data is pinned to Singapore, again, we'll see additional latency, and we'll also see how their user access differs from the other two users. So there was a bit more of a delay there. I can view the file, but I can't do anything else with it. There's no other data that I have access to.
But Bob and Carol will get a good experience from where they are.
That's it for today's demo. I hope it's given you a good introduction to CockroachDB and how it can be used in IAM use cases.